Dr. Margaret Holloway lay motionless in the ICU bed, her normally sharp eyes now vacant and unfocused. Machines beeped in steady rhythm around her, monitoring a life that hung by an increasingly frayed thread. Outside the glass walls of her room, the finest physicians in Chicago bustled with frustrated urgency, trading theories in hushed, desperate voices. "We've run every test imaginable," Dr. Richard Chen muttered, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. "MRI, CT scans, full blood panel, spinal tap, everything comes back inconclusive." Dr. Sarah Morrison nodded grimly. 3 weeks, and we're no closer to a diagnosis. Her cognitive function is deteriorating by the day. If we don't figure this out soon, she didn't need to finish. Everyone knew Margaret Holloway wasn't just any patient. She was the hospital's chief of surgery, a medical legend who'd published groundbreaking research on neural pathways. Watching her mind slip away felt like watching their own mortality, down in the basement level, among the fluorescent-lit corridors where maintenance crews kept the hospital running. Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart with methodical precision. She'd worked the night shift for 12 years, invisible to most of the doctors who rushed past her. Rosa had learned long ago that to the medical elite, she was simply part of the scenery, someone who emptied trash bins and mopped floors while they saved lives. But Rosa held a secret close to her heart, one that walked the very halls she cleaned. "Mama, you forgot your lunch again," came a gentle voice. Rosa looked up to see her daughter, Elena, approaching in scrubs. At 28, Elena worked as a nurse in the cardiology unit, a source of immense pride for Rosa, though she'd never dared dream her daughter could achieve more. "Mija, you should be resting," Rosa said in Spanish, her accent thick with concern. "You worked a double shift." Elena smiled, but Rosa noticed the shadows under her daughter's eyes. "I heard about Dr. Holloway. They are saying she might not make it through the week." Rosa crossed herself. Such a tragedy. So young, so brilliant. What Rosa didn't know was that Elena had been spending her breaks in the hospital's medical library, poring over Dr. Holloway's case files. Elena had a secret of her own, one that could cost her everything. 5 years earlier, Elena had been on track to finish medical school at Northwestern. She'd earned a full scholarship, excelled in her classes, and dreamed of becoming a neurologist. Then her father had died suddenly, leaving Rosa drowning in debt. Elena had withdrawn from school in her final year, taking the nursing position to help keep their family afloat. She'd never told her mother the full story. Rosa thought Elena had simply chosen nursing over the stress of becoming a doctor. It was easier than admitting the sacrifice, easier than watching her mother carry guilt that wasn't hers to bear. But Elena's medical education, though incomplete, had given her a perspective the attending physicians lacked. And as she reviewed Dr. Holloway's case, a pattern emerged that made her pulse quicken. The symptoms were rare, so rare that most doctors would never encounter them in their entire careers. But Elena had written her unfinished thesis on obscure neurological conditions. She recognized the constellation of signs, the progressive cognitive decline, the episodic fevers, the specific pattern of inflammation in the cerebrospinal fluid. It could be autoimmune encephalitis, but not the common variants. This looked like a recently discovered subtype, one so new that it wasn't in standard diagnostic protocols, yet Elena's hands trembled as she pulled up research articles from the past 18 months. There it was, a case series from a hospital in Berlin describing exactly these symptoms. The treatment was aggressive immunotherapy, started early. Every day of delay meant potentially irreversible brain damage. She had to tell someone. But who would listen to a nurse who'd never finished her degree? Dr. Chen stood at the nurse's station, reviewing labs for the 100th time, when Elena approached. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Dr. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have a thought about Dr. Holloway's case." He glanced up with barely concealed impatience. "Elena, we have over 100 specialists consulting on this case. Unless there's a nursing concern, I think it might be NMDA receptor encephalitis, the variant subtype," she said quickly. "The IGLON5 antibody variant specifically." Dr. Chen's expression shifted from dismissive to irritated. "That's an extremely rare diagnosis, and frankly, beyond your scope of practice. We've already ruled out the common forms of autoimmune encephalitis. But have you tested for the IGLON5 antibodies specifically? The test isn't standard. You have to request it specially from Elena." His voice carried an edge now. "I appreciate your concern, but diagnostic medicine requires years of training. We can't chase every zebra diagnosis suggested by," he caught himself, but the implication hung in the air, "suggested by a nurse. Suggested by someone without the credentials." Elena felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, of having the door closed before she could prove herself. "Of course, Dr. Chen. I apologize for overstepping." She walked away, her face burning, but her resolve hardening. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Dr. Holloway was running out of time, and she was certain about the diagnosis. But the medical hierarchy was ironclad. A nurse questioning the diagnostic team would be seen as arrogant at best, delusional at worst, unless, the idea formed slowly, dangerously. Dr. Holloway's husband, James, had been at the hospital every day, desperate for answers. He'd publicly stated he'd try anything to save his wife. If Elena could reach him directly, bypass the medical gatekeepers, it was risky. It could cost her job. But what was her job worth if she stayed silent and Dr. Holloway died? The next evening, Elena waited in the hospital chapel, a quiet space where James Holloway often retreated to pray. When he entered, shoulders slumped with exhaustion and grief, she approached cautiously. "Mr. Holloway. My name is Elena Martinez. I'm a nurse here, and I need to talk to you about your wife." He looked at her with the hollow eyes of a man who'd heard too many condolences, too many empty reassurances. "Are you one of her nurses?" "No, sir. But I've been following her case, and I believe I know what's wrong with her." That got his attention. He straightened slightly. "The doctors have been working around the clock, I know. And they are brilliant. But this is a condition so rare that it's easy to miss. It's a variant of autoimmune encephalitis that was only identified in recent research. The treatment is specific and time-sensitive." Elena pulled out printed research articles, her hands steady now with purpose. "I can't order tests or prescribe treatment. But you can request that the doctors run this specific antibody panel. If I'm right, the treatment could save her life. If I'm wrong..." She swallowed hard. "If I'm wrong, you've lost nothing but the cost of one test." James studied her face, searching for something, sincerity, perhaps, or desperation. "Why are you doing this? If you're right, why haven't the doctors figured it out?" "Because sometimes the answer comes from unexpected places," Elena said quietly. "And because I know what it's like to have knowledge, but not the credentials to make people listen." He looked at the research papers, then back at her. "What do you need me to do?" The next morning, Dr. Chen found himself in an uncomfortable meeting with James Holloway and the hospital administrator. "My wife is dying," James said, his voice steady but strained. "I'm requesting that you run a test for IgLON5 antibodies. I have the research here." Dr. Chen recognized the papers immediately. "Mr. Holloway, did Elena Martinez approach you? Does it matter who brought it to my attention? Are you willing to run the test or not?" The administrator shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Chen, given the circumstances, I think we should pursue all reasonable avenues. This is highly irregular," Chen protested. "We can't have nurses going around the medical team to patients' families, then run the test and prove her wrong," James said flatly. "Because if my wife dies and it turns out a nurse knew what was wrong all along, I'll make sure everyone knows that you dismissed her because of her title instead of listening to her reasoning." The test was ordered that afternoon. 48 hours later, the results came back positive. The ICU erupted into controlled chaos as Dr. Chen and the team immediately started the specialized immunotherapy protocol. Elena heard about it from another nurse, but stayed away, not wanting to draw attention. 3 days into treatment, Dr. Holloway opened her eyes and recognized her husband. Within 2 weeks, she was sitting up, talking, her cognitive function returning day by day. Elena was restocking supplies in a cardiology room when Dr. Chen found her. "Elena, can we talk?" She braced herself for termination. "Of course." He closed the door, and she noticed he looked different, humbled, perhaps. "You saved Dr. Holloway's life. You made a diagnosis that 100 doctors missed." "I got lucky," she said quietly. "I'd studied that specific condition before." "Lucky?" He shook his head. "You recognized a pattern, did the research, and persisted even when I dismissed you. That's not luck. That's good medicine." He paused. "I owe you an apology. I let my assumptions about credentials cloud my judgment. You had the knowledge, and I didn't listen. I appreciate that, Dr. Chen. Dr. Holloway wants to meet you. And..." He hesitated. "She asked me to give you this." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter and a check large enough to make Elena's breath catch. The letter read, "Elena, I understand you left medical school to help your family. This is a scholarship fund, enough to complete your degree and residency, if you want it. The medical field needs people who see what others miss and have the courage to speak up. We need you as a doctor." Margaret Holloway. Elena's eyes blurred with tears. 6 months later, Elena walked across the stage to receive her medical degree, her mother sobbing with pride in the audience. Dr. Holloway, fully recovered, gave the commencement address. "Medicine is not about credentials," she told the graduating class. "It's about observation, knowledge, and the humility to recognize that wisdom can come from anywhere, even from the daughter of the woman who cleaned our floors while we were too busy to notice our own blind spots." She caught Elena's eye and smiled. "The best doctors are the ones who remember that every person in a hospital, from the janitor to the chief of surgery, has dignity, value, and potentially, the answer we've been searching for." As Elena stood in her graduation robes, she thought about the invisible people who'd raised her, supported her, and believed in her. Her mother, who'd sacrificed everything. The patients who'd trusted her as a nurse. The knowledge she'd gained in the shadows of an incomplete education. She'd been invisible for so long. But she'd learned that sometimes, the people no one sees are the ones seeing most clearly. The system hadn't been designed for someone like her. But she was going to change that system from the inside, one overlooked perspective at a time.